Is your workplace changing? Are you part of a business or team that is currently or about to change? If you've wondered how to best manage, lead, or adapt to change efforts in your workplace, stick around because we're about to explore processing change. Hi everyone, Dennis Gilbert. Most people would quickly agree that everything in the world around us is changing. If you want to start a challenging or perhaps interesting conversation in your workplace, bring up a previous or current change effort. It isn't so much that people dislike change. It is that change takes people out of their comfort zone. It makes them feel uneasy, nervous, and perhaps even afraid. If we consider the average career of a person in the workforce today, we may guess that an average career could last about 40 to 45 years. Of course, in some cases, careers may be longer than 45 years, and in other cases, they may be shorter. But just as an example for our discussion during this segment, I'd like to consider the idea that a career lasts about 40 years. I'd like to start off by taking us on a little time capsule journey back in time about 40 years. So let's go back to 1975. Bill Gates and Paul Allen found Microsoft. The Vietnam War ended with the fall of Saigon. If we move ahead about 10 years to 1985, the Internet's domain name system was created, and Coca-Cola launched a big product change blunder with their product, New Coke. If we move ahead another 10 years to 1995, the DVD, the optical disc computer storage media, was announced. eBay was founded, and the NASDAQ Composite Index closed above 1,000 for the first time. This was a very pivotal point in the past 40 years because when the NASDAQ Composite Index closed above 1,000 points, it marked the start of the dot-com boom, and unfortunately, at some point later, there was a dot-com bust. If we jump ahead another 10 years to 2005, YouTube was founded. And unfortunately, Hurricane Katrina hit the U.S. Gulf Coast, which was one of the most terrible U.S. disasters in history. That brings us forward, if we jump another 10 years, to the current year, 2015. Many of the points that I've just highlighted have a close relationship to technology. While of course there may be many other notable events that have occurred during the past 40 years, this may help bring it into perspective for us for someone who has been in the workforce during the past 40 years. There have been many other technology changes that have occurred over the last 30, 40, or 50 years. Let's take the fax machine or facsimile machine as an example. If we were to go back into the mid to late 1960s and ask the question, what is a fax machine? We probably would have received a lot of strange looks, and many people were unaware or unfamiliar with this technology product. If we move forward into the mid to late 1980s and we were to ask the question, what is a fax machine? We may have received a response something along the lines of, wow, That's this really cool device that you stick a piece of paper in, you dial a telephone number for a machine across town, across the state, or across the country that has a similar box on the other end, and it will send a copy of this image to that other machine. It was actually pretty neat or pretty cool during that time frame. If you were to move ahead another segment of time, 10, 20 years into the current year, 2015, and you ask the question, what is a fax machine? Of course, most people recognize what a fax machine is, but we certainly probably also appreciate the diminishing use of this technology product. I'll often joke with people, do you still have a fax machine number listed on your business card? And it's mixed results when I ask that question. And of course, a lot of people do still use this product, but I think most would probably agree that it is diminishing in its use. So when we consider this idea or this concept of the fax machine, which may have reached its peak in the late 1980s or early to mid 1990s, when we think about that product and its introduction, its peak, and its diminishing use, most of that has occurred during a career of many people that are still in the workforce today. Let's take a moment and consider a couple of other workforce-related changes. When we think about this, we can think about the idea that typewriters have become word processors. Filing cabinets have become databases. Memos have converted or shifted to email. Pencil ledgers have become spreadsheets. And wired phones have become cellular. Of course, as we start to think about all of these technology changes and all of the changes that have occurred in our workforce, we may think about the idea that this would spark a conversation on generational diversity. And of course, we do have many different generations currently existing in our workforce. But for the scope of this segment, we want to stay focused on processing change. In today's workplace and economic conditions, you cannot just do things differently, you must do different things. We have to consider or think about what are some of the behaviors, traditions, values, or frameworks that may guide us as we process through our workplace today. Of course, it's often a challenge for us to change some of these values, traditions, or behaviors. But in fact, we need to change in order to be effective. Some of this requires risk, and risk may feel like a very scary position for us to be in. When we're in our workplace role, risk is critical, but we also have to consider that we must risk within our proper approval channels and not step outside of the bounds of what may be considered acceptable or normal levels of risk. I often think back to a famous quote from a famous former CEO named Jack Welch. Jack Welch was the famous CEO of GE back in the mid-1980s, and he's still today cranking out books and materials to help people and businesses manage better and lead better. And Jack had a quote related to change that goes something like this: if the rate of change outside of our organization is greater than the rate of change inside our organization, we may be looking at the beginning of the end. I think this is such a important quote or a valuable quote for us to consider, because there are things that are changing outside of our organization, things that are putting pressure or force on our businesses or organizations to change. And if we try to ignore all of those forces and keep doing things the same old way, we'll probably end up falling behind. So let's take a minute and consider some of the external and internal forces that are putting pressure on our organizations today. Some external forces that may be putting pressure on our organization could include things like technology, the economy, and of course, government regulations. Some internal factors or forces that may be applying pressure to our organization could include things like the organization's leadership, its vision or mission, the workforce demographics occurring both internally and the opportunity for the workforce that we can hire externally to bring in to be part of our internal team. And internally, we also can have force or pressure applied to us by performance failures. If we've had a quality issue or some service or product, good, regardless of what it is, something that our organization does or produces that has faced some challenge or problem, that can also apply pressure internally and force change efforts. As we consider some of these forces that are exerting pressure on our organizations, it brings to mind the idea of some psychological principles that may hold us back from effectively or efficiently processing through change efforts. The first one I want to mention is the idea of action anxiety. And just like it sounds, it is this incredible or intense fear of moving forward, something that creates this anxiety in us and a fear or hesitation to take appropriate action. So we may think of this as a dentist appointment. If we have to make a dentist appointment or go to a dentist appointment, we may have some tooth bothering us or for some other dental work, and we associate the dentist many times as not such a pleasant experience. So we may hesitate out of our fear or anxiety associated with this appointment. We hesitate from taking action. And so it is that intense fear of moving forward, the idea of action anxiety. The second psychological principle that may hold us back is one commonly known as a negative fantasy. So we can think about the idea of fantasy, and if we apply negative to the concept of fantasy, we can quickly recognize that negative fantasies would be us expecting the worst possible scenario or outcome from some change effort or some action that we're currently involved in or about to undertake. And the idea behind negative fantasies are that they represent a fantasy, and they represent a fantasy that the worst possible scenario is more real or more likely than the true outcome that will occur. So it ties in a little bit with that action anxiety, and it's the idea that we always think the worst instead of thinking more realistically of what the likely outcome will be. The third point that I want to make with this is the idea that we may have a fear of separation. And of course, this principle may also apply somewhat closely to the first two. But the fear of separation is the idea that we may be alienated from the team. we may be removed from the team, or we may be discounted from any input or future ideas if we make a suggestion or try to move forward with some change effort. So these three psychological principles, the idea of action anxiety, negative fantasies, or the fear of separation, will often hold us back or cause us to hesitate in the face of processing change. It's also important for us to consider, what is the difference between change and transition? Sometimes these words are used interchangeably, but in this segment I want to highlight some of the differences between the two because it's important for us to consider how we process through change. Is that really change or is that transition? So when we think about change, change really represents a disruption in our expectations. The key with change is that it's an external event, and it's often related to circumstances or situations which sometimes, but not always, may be outside of our control. Transition, on the other hand, is a psychological reorientation to the change event. It's an internal process. It's how we think or feel about transitioning, about moving through this change effort. It's often closely tied to a state of mind or even our sense of identity. So when we think about this difference between change and transition, and again, noting that sometimes these words are used interchangeably, there really is a difference. And change is that external event, but transition represents that internal process, how we move through a change event. It's also important to note that this process may be different for each individual. So in other words, the amount of time that it takes to process through a change event may vary from person to person. We've covered so much in this short segment, but there's still so much more. Let's take a moment and review some of the discussion points that we've processed through during this segment. We started off with a discussion about the average length of a person's workforce career, and we estimated that length to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 years. Then we took what we would call a time capsule journey. We went back in time about 40 years and highlighted several world or US related events that occurred during the past 40 years. And we considered how may those events have impacted people that are in the workforce today. We also talked about a technology example and the idea that technology drives so much of our change. And we considered a product known as the fax machine and how that entered and almost has left our current workplace today. Moving ahead a little bit further, we talked about the idea of some psychological principles that may hold us back from effectively processing through change. While there are many of these principles, we talked about just three. We talked about the idea of action anxiety, that intense fear that may hold us back or prevent us from taking action. We talked about the idea of negative fantasies. And of course, negative fantasies are the idea that what we believe in our minds that the outcome will be is much more serious or much more intense or worse than what the likely outcome will be. And then we also talked about the idea of the fear of separation and how we may fear being alienated from our team or being removed from our organization based on either actions we're about to take or based on our inactions that are holding us back from taking the appropriate action. That is a lot of information to process through as we think about change. But now I want to take a few moments and sort of wrap up the idea of what it means to process through change. We have to consider that processing through change is really about how you or your team transition through that change event. It isn't so much that we dislike change. It is that change takes us out of our comfort zone. When we're out of our comfort zone, we may feel uneasy, nervous, and afraid. If we think about some situations that could possibly occur in our everyday life, we may think about driving to some destination and we're unsure of the exact location. Maybe we're following a map or a GPS system and we reach a detour sign and we become more nervous and afraid. We're now uncertain of the path to get us there. We may worry, will we arrive on time? The same may be true if we encounter a traffic jam. And the traffic is backed up and we may be facing the unfavorable action of being late for an appointment or late for a meeting and how that may affect our image or our reputation. And even if we fly in an airplane and we consider arrival or departure times and things associated with airline travel that may make us feel uneasy, nervous, and afraid. While these may represent some everyday circumstances that may occur in our lives, we tend to take them for granted that they are not that much different than some other change event, some change event that may be occurring in our workplace, some change event that may or may not be within our control. We have to efficiently and effectively transition through that change event. outside of our comfort zone, our assessment of real risk may change. We may allow our negative fantasies, our fear of separation, or other psychological principles creep into our minds, and the anticipated outcomes may become more severe or more serious than the likely positive change outcome we're hoping for. These psychological principles often hold us back. They cause us to hesitate, to not take action, and to keep us stuck in stress. When we consider that change is really that external event and transition is that internal process, we want to try to avoid being stuck at the point of stress. We often become more stressed or more concerned when we weigh the real risk as being the negative fantasy or the fear of separation as compared to the more likely outcome that a positive change effort will occur. Perhaps we need to think about change differently. If everything in the world around us is changing, it could be that the riskiest place for us to be is stuck in the position of the status quo. Thank you for watching today. Your questions or suggestions are important. If you have a question or suggestion, please feel free to send them to tv@DennisEGilbert.com. Your question or suggestion may be used in a future episode. Now, let's end with a closing quote. Staying the same may feel like the safest bet until you realize that staying the same has left you behind.